The board and battens on the upper half of the shed are a combination of primed 1x10 and 1x4 trim boards. The first step is to install some blocking in several places so that I have solid nailing for the board and batten siding. With the blocking in place, I tack the first board up, making sure to get it dead plumb. If it's not perfect, I'll end up fighting the layout all the way across the wall.
Okay, as you can see, I got my first couple of boards up for the board and batten siding. Now the nailing pattern for this is going to be 2 nails in the center of the board, roughly, think about dividing the board up into thirds basically. To hold the edges, I'm going to come back later and install a batten. It'll actually be a little bit wider than this piece. And that's going to pin down the edges of the board. It's going to go straight back into this blocking. For now, I'm using this 3/4 inch spacer just to establish my coursing. So the next board will go up with the 3/4 spacer, the next board, and so on until I get to the end of the wall. Okay, now for the board and batten siding on the gable ends, we're going to start in the center and work our way out. That's because we have a vent here, so we want that to be the center of the layout. Now you'll notice that these pieces don't go all the way down to the sill. And they could, there's no reason not to, except that it makes my measurements harder, because then I have to worry about getting a measurement from underside of the roof down here and getting it exact. By leaving a gap in between the two, it gives me some wiggle room for measurements, and it's all going to be covered up by a horizontal board after anyway.
The boards tuck up behind the fly rafter assembly for a nice clean finished look, and this technique also means that the angled cut on the top of the boards doesn't have to be perfect. With the boards in place, I have to switch gears and move to the trim. First, I'll tackle the fascia board on the back of the shed, which tucks up under the eave. The easiest way to handle the notches for the rafter tails is to tack the board in place and use the rafters to mark the area to be cut.
Okay, now this board is going to have to tuck all the way up underneath, which means I'm going to need to have to notch it around these rafter tails. But rather than try and figure out what this layout is on the ground using a tape measure, I'm just going to take my board, cut it a little bit longer than I know I need, tack it up tight to the bottom of the rafter tails with some screws here, and then I'm going to come back and I'll use my speed square and a pencil, mark my notches out, pull it back down, and cut it with a jigsaw. Now for this side of the shed, the windows are going to be in our way, so we really can't notch that piece of trim and slide it up. We don't have room to pivot it into place. So we're going to do it in 2 pieces. These pieces of 5/4 trim that go between the rafter tails, and then a thinner piece that we rip down that's going to slide up underneath to give you the appearance of the full height of trim.
Next comes some more pre-assembled corner boards. And the door and window casing, which I leave long, mark in place for a final cut, and then install. Make sure to bevel the bottom edges of the window casing where it meets the sill. On the back gable of the building, I'm going to continue the same horizontal trim. Then I'll move to the front gable.
Okay, this gable end is a little trickier than the other side because we have 2 windows and a door. Once we get those in, then we can fill in above with the rest of the battens.
With the trim in place, I just need to fill in with the pine battens. The job of the battens is to hide the expansion gap between the boards, while also preventing them from cupping. Nails should go through the middle of the battens and directly into the framing, pinning the edges of the 1x10s down to prevent cupping, but still allowing the wide boards to expand with changes in humidity.
Okay, all we need now on this side is the vent. We're going to put that in from the inside, and we need to fill in these last couple of pieces of blocking that we left out.
Finish up the gable ends with a pair of vents that slide in from the inside and get fastened to the frame. Earlier we took the door off to be painted. Now I'll re-hang it in the opening and finish up the doorway with a ledge. Well, that's my last fastener. We have the painters coming next week,
And then we're going to have some landscaping and some steps put in. And then